My name is Liam Ferguson. I work for the Oregon Department of Transportation and run the Safe Routes to School construction program. And I'm really glad that you all could join us this morning. Next slide, please. I wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I've been working in Safe Routes to School since about 2007 and done everything from taught bike safety in schools to manage Safe Routes to School programs to now running the construction program for grant program for the Oregon Department of Transportation. And I wanted to introduce kind of the powerhouse behind this presentation, Katie Celine.
Yep,
Sorry.
Celine. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm Katie Celine, planner at Alta Planning and Design, and it has been my great pleasure to coordinate the ODOT Safe Routes to School Project Identification Program over the past couple of years. I do a lot of Safe Routes work at Alta, and among other things, also help lead our public engagement service area. Pass back to you, Leanne.
Awesome. Next slide, please. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about our project identification program. We'll do a Safe Routes to School program overview first. I'll do that really quickly, and then we'll pass it off to Katie to talk real specifically about the project identification program and tell us some of the themes and stories from the road that she and her team at Alta learned from traveling to dozens of communities across Oregon over the last couple of years and working with schools and communities to make plans for Safe Routes to School. We'll have a lot of time for discussions and questions. So be ready for that. If you have anything that you want to share or any question that you'd like to ask, we'll have plenty of time for that at the end. It's nice to see a lot of faces that I know, or a lot of names that I know, and a couple people that I don't know. So welcome everybody. Next slide, please. So I think I just had a couple minutes to do a Safe Routes to School overview. So at ODOT, Safe Routes to School, what it looks like is grants and services provided to local communities. We partner with a bunch of people. It takes a village to address barriers to students walking and biking to school. And so there are local level Safe Routes to School programs helping at that level. There is a statewide Safe Routes to School program, which I work and providing those grants and services. But it really is, it takes everybody to get our kids to school safely. So I want to thank you all for being here and now being a part of that village. One thing to note is that our Safe Routes to School program is growing. So it's been a program at ODOT since I'm going to say 2007, when the original federal legislation came out. And ODOT's been running a construction and an education program ever since then. The program got a little bit of a boost in 2018 when additional funding was found to do Safe Routes to School construction projects. And so we now have a pretty robust Safe Routes to School construction program and a Safe Routes to School education program. The information that you see in the light blue, dark blue boxes are the funding that we're going to see between 2023 and 2027. So there's some funding that we get every year, but we've been awarded some one-time funds over the next couple of years to allocate through services and grants to local communities. So we have a lot coming up, and for our education program between 2023 and 2027, we'll need to allocate about $9 million for grants and services. And for our construction program, we'll have about $96 million in that same time frame to allocate grants and services. Folks might be interested in the funds from the new infrastructure bill that just passed at the federal level. The Oregon Transportation Commission decided that $30 million of that would go to Safe Routes to School. So you'll see that you'll see in those lists that sort of one-time bump in funding over the next couple of years. The source is listed as IIJA, that's that infrastructure bill, where we're going to bump our education program up by $4 million during that time frame, and our construction program by $26 million in that time frame. And all that means is that we will just have more services and grants when we traditionally do our solicitation. So there won't be any additional solicitations that you need to look out for. Just our regular every 2-year solicitation will be happening in 2024. And so we look forward to providing more services and funding at that time. So our Safe Routes to School program is growing. Our project identification program that Katie will talk about is actually a big key to make sure that our program can continue to grow. So what the project identification program does is it allows us to send a consultant to a community, which is Alta Planning and Design, to work with the school and the city to come up with a project list and prioritize that project list for what projects can we put in the ground that will help address the barriers to students walking and rolling to school. So it's a great process. It helps a community basically have that project list that they will need to be able to apply for funds. So what we like to say is that it's building the pipeline of funds for future safe routes, pipeline of projects, I'm sorry, for future safe routes to school funds. And these are projects exactly what you're thinking. They're like sidewalks, they're crosswalks, they're rapid flashing beacons. They are kind of the bread and butter of the pedestrian and bicycle system for our kids right around schools. So communities all over the state will have a list of projects that they're ready to apply for or fund through other ways into the future. So that's kind of the overview that I have around Safe Routes to School. I'll also look out for our next construction solicitation in 2024. So those are the two main pieces that the construction side of the program does. Our education program will also have another solicitation in 2024. So to do programs like hiring staff to run education and encouragement programs like bike safety classes or pedestrian safety classes for kids, or run events like Walk and Roll to School Day, or the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day, things like that. So that's kind of my Safe Routes to School overview, and I'd love to pass it off to Katie next. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Leanne. So just real quick before I dive in, I just wanted to share kind of the inspiration behind doing this session. Our team at Alta, after working with communities around the state over the past year, we're all feeling so inspired and kind of hopeful about the interest and momentum around Safe Routes to School and kind of active transportation more generally. And especially, I think, in contrast to like the kind of dark, challenging, tumultuous times of COVID, this project and like getting to know so many people around the state working on these plans was very much like a beacon of hope and inspiration for us. And the themes and kind of stories that I'll tell today are kind of a combination and like synthesis of our whole team at Alta who has been working on these around the state. So I'll start out and just have a couple slides just giving like a little bit more kind of detail for how these Safe Routes to School processes happen, what the purpose of these are, and then shift and talk about some of the kind of trends and themes that we have observed over the past year. So the purpose of these Safe Routes to School plans are to identify projects and programs to make it safer and more accessible for students and families to walk, bike, and take transit. And as Leanne was describing, these really concretely feed into the ODOT Safe Routes program construction and education grants. And we're increasingly looking to make connections and help communities prepare for other grant programs and ways to get projects built, such as the Community Paths Grant. And something that we've heard from the communities we have worked with thus far. Leanne, or Lindsay, would you guys help let people in from the waiting room? Can you see those notifications? Cool. Okay, thanks. Something that we've heard specifically from the communities that we've been working with that's been a major benefit of working on these plans with us are the collaboration and the facilitation of all of the different agencies that work on Safe Routes projects, getting everybody together in the same room and on the same page around what needs to happen, what's already happening. And it can be a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Like in a typical process, we have any combination of staff from ODOT, counties, city staff, engineers and planners, elected officials, folks from school district leadership, school transportation departments, school, teachers, principals, PTA, PTO members. We often work with community-based groups who have an interest in helping families get around safely. And of course, if there's a Safe Routes to School coordinator in the community, they're always involved as well. And we try to make sure that this work aligns with other planning initiatives. If there's a TSP underway or something that the transit agency is working on, we try to make sure that we're aligning both our timeline and kind of the content of our recommendations with those other planning needs. And then, of course, addressing the needs of families from historically marginalized groups. We try to keep that top of mind and make sure that both the process and what we're coming up with addresses those needs specifically. And then this kind of timeline shows the arc of one of our typical PIP processes. We start out with kind of project initiation, getting everybody on the project management team onboarded and on the same page. We do a round of background data collection, looking at existing planning documents, demographic data, crash data, really get a good sense of the community. And then we have our school safety assessment, which is like really the core component of the process. We did a kind of a combination of virtual and in-person work in that part for this round with COVID. Community engagement, we try to time our visit with any like existing community meeting, school event, so that we can table and talk to parents. Walk audit, where we observe student arrival or dismissal with anyone who's available on the project management team to come and really observe how students and families are using the existing facilities. And then a facility inventory. So a really detailed look at what infrastructure is right around the school, what are the gaps, is the signage up to date, that sort of thing. And then we take all of that information and start to put together our recommendations, draft the plan, circulate that back to everyone who's been working with us, refine it, and then we have a public comment period where we share draft plan back with the school community and try to get as many eyes on that as possible before finalizing our plan. And of course, this nice linear process doesn't capture the many ways that we pivoted and adapted this over the past year, particularly this round of the PIPs in the midst of COVID. We did all sorts of things, virtual walk audits. We trained community members or city staff to do their own walk audits. We kind of did things in different phases to make sure that communities were getting the information they needed at specific times, such as communities that were updating their transportation system plan and needed things sooner, but we couldn't go because of COVID, and just trying to be really dynamic. And I think that is one of the huge lessons of this year and big strengths of this program is the ability to pivot and adapt and make sure that communities' needs are being met, which are different all around the state. And I think we were able to do that while maintaining momentum and still delivering really kind of useful information. And so right now we are wrapping up our second batch of these Safe Routes to School plans and getting ready to start our next one. So the third kind of round of these will kick off this summer and run through next school year. And map of the communities that we've been working with in this current round that we're wrapping up. 23 communities around the state, 46 schools, at least a few in every ODOT region of the state. And much of the field work and kind of stories that I'll share are from this past winter, where we did a lot of our those site assessments, going out doing walk audits, the facility inventory, and as I'm sure many of the Safe Routes folks in the audience today know, typically we would not do the November walk audit. That's, I would say, a general rule of thumb, which makes sense. It's dark, it's rainy, there's probably fewer students walking and biking. However, I will say that I am kind of sold actually on the November walk audit. We still saw so many families out and about, and which was really inspiring and cool to see. And we were able to address like lighting needs and saw a lot more like drainage issues than we normally would have. So we did it that way because of COVID, and we were trying to like squeeze them in as schools were opening. But plug for November walk on it. So I'll actually pause there for a moment, and before I shift into talking about some of the themes that we saw from this round, I'd love to answer any like kind of process questions or like clarifying questions about what is the PIP? Did I not define an acronym? Yeah. And feel free, I think everybody can unmute themselves, I'm pretty sure, or feel free to put questions in the chat.
Also wanted to note that we did do one for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation on our first round of PIPs, and we have the Burns Paiute tribes lined up for our next round of PIPs. So if anyone has any, so we haven't worked with a lot of tribes, but we worked with a couple, and it's a really exciting part of this program as well, which is we're working with a lot of different communities that we haven't worked before. I can keep an eye on the chat, Katie, and read them out loud.
Okay, thanks.
Is the PIP in conjunction with anything else a program might be doing with ALTA already?
So it's not in conjunction with other ALTA work necessarily, but it can be in conjunction with other like ODOT Safe Routes to School work that communities are doing. So we have kind of a new, over the past like year and a half, program of having hubs for each region, which I think many of you have attended your region's hub meeting, where there's webinars and just like opportunities to share best practices and learning from each other, kind of more on the education side. And so we've had communities working with us doing these Safe Routes to School, like planning assistance work, also attending those hub meetings, and also now getting plugged into the grants. And it's been a really great way to like bring people into the Safe Routes to School family and realm, and kind of have it not be like a standalone like planning document, but really like a gateway into other ways to work on Safe Routes to School. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something we often tell people as like an intro, if they haven't really done anything around safe routes to school yet, but the community's really interested, this is a pretty easy first step, which is like, they don't even have to sign any paperwork. Like it's not, since we're not actually giving people funds, which can be actually kind of difficult sometimes, we're just providing a service. This is a really great entryway into safe routes. But we do try to align with transportation system plan updates whenever, like when people fill out an application for this program, they generally will let us know, like, how will you use this plan when you're done? And it kind of gives us an idea of where they're hoping to go. And before, Katie had talked about dividing some of the plans into different phases. And a lot of that was because the plan wasn't actually going to be ready by the time we started our application process for this current construction grant round, but the communities really needed that project list in order to get started. So there was a phase where it was providing all that information before the plan was actually done so that they could apply. We really see this as like our one level of application assistance that we can give to communities for the construction program, and maybe a little bit for the education program, because we put a little bit of ideas in there for education, but this one's not really a deep dive into education.
And it's been cool. We're able to kind of tailor to each community, like where there's a lot more interest in education or like readiness to start more of an education program. We are able to do kind of more of that. And then in communities that like really just need some like basic infrastructure in order to like feel comfortable even promoting walking and biking to school, we are able to like turn that down a little bit and focus even more on the infrastructure side. All right. Any other?
Haven't seen any other questions. So we could probably keep checking, and just if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Yeah, and Leanne, feel free if there are questions in the chat, let me know. I'm happy to like break it up so it's less of just me talking.
Great.
Okay. So I'll shift now and talk about some of the big themes that we have been seeing over the course of doing these projects. Kind of generally, but also very focused on this like crazy tumultuous time with COVID. Yeah, this work has just been so inspiring and hopeful, and just some funny stories as well. So the first one that I will talk about are the transportation impacts of COVID, and kind of what we're seeing from around the state. Three big types of impacts with shared transportation, busing, parent pickup and drop off, and with active transportation. And some of the impacts on school busing, this will not be news to many of you. Seeing a lot of school bus driver shortages related to like general hiring challenges, but then also in parallel, the need for additional staff at schools and in transportation departments to track COVID protocols and increase sanitation demands. And this has contributed to school bus route cancellation, major disruptions. And then on top of that, kind of the parent concerns and perspectives piece. We, in talking to parents and schools, heard a lot of concern about being in the close quarters on school buses, and kind of hesitancy about sending students on the bus right now. And but then also the other end of the spectrum of parents not wanting to send their students on the bus because they don't want them to have to wear a mask. And some of the like kind of smaller communities that we worked with, like the school students wouldn't need to wear a mask in the school, but they would need to wear a mask on the school bus. And that created some challenges that we heard about. And you know, a lot of challenges out of this, but also some creative solutions. We heard about one community that ended up their bus service had to be canceled essentially due to staff shortages, but the individual school organized a school shuttle system on rainy days where the school staff would rotate and go and pick up students who had no other way to get to school. And then impacts on parent pickup and drop off. Again, probably not news to many of you on the call, but the increase in parents and caregivers dropping off students, picking up students in personal vehicles. You can see the kind of classic image of congestion at a school pickup site. And this stems from concerns about the shared transportation, concerns about busing, in some cases, greater flexibility in parent schedules, and also the kind of shifting and unusual school schedules, making it kind of harder to hit a cadence of other ways to get to school. And yeah, resulting in long lines, idling, increased air pollution, just increased traffic generally near schools, and more requests for caregiver transportation safety education. So like kind of communications campaigns and like ways to request that parents change their driving behavior to be safer. And then the impacts on active transportation. Many of the schools that we worked with over the past year emphasize like an increase in the importance of walking and rolling for transportation to get kids to and from school, but also for exercise, recreation, and connection during COVID. And you know, I think many of us have felt that as well. But for families, that has been very uneven. And some families have more flexibility to walk and bike with students, and others really do not. And yeah, the other piece of this, increased traffic near schools. We definitely heard from many principals and crossing guards about the increase in kind of unsafe situations of interactions between students walking and biking and people driving, just with more congestion and potentially more people driving and more people walking and biking to school. Then
Katie, we had a question
sure.
We have a question from Janice, which was, did any schools look at using / encouraging remote drop-offs instead of increasing the traffic around the schools?
Yes, excellent question, and actually a perfect segue into this next slide. Actually, the image on the screen here is a kind of grassroots education program down in Banks, where they were kind of on their own starting a park and walk program just out of like sheer need to reduce congestion near the school. And actually we have Grace Steinbach, my former colleague, on the call. He could answer even more questions about this particular program. But to answer your question, yes, like that was definitely coming up. We, in previous rounds of the PIP, that's something we would suggest and recommend. And I would say we continued to recommend that, but had even more like interest in that. And like that would like resonate more with principals as something that could like really solve the challenges that they were like facing on a daily basis, which was interesting. And so yeah, next theme that I'll talk about is that the Safe Routes to School gospel is spreading. Yes, we are starting a Safe Routes to School cult. And we are really seeing that communities are more knowledgeable now about Safe Routes to School, kind of like the baseline community that we're coming in to work with often has more information about the state program and about like what they might do for education or to start to get a program started in their community. And I think a lot of this is success of the ODOT program, getting the word out, and they're just like it being operational at this like higher level over a couple of years. People have heard about it. And then also with the COVID transportation impacts, like really forcing schools and districts on top of everything else that they have on their plate to look for new and creative ways to engage with their community and try to solve some of those impacts. And yeah, as I mentioned, this park and walk posters from banks, and they're using outreach and education to reroute vehicle circulation, and we're kind of working on this in parallel with their Safe Routes to School plan. And then another example from McMinnville, participants were enthusiastic about walking school bus and kind of group walks as a strategy to influence travel behavior and get more families out of their personal vehicles and trying something new. So the third theme that I will talk about is quick build creativity on the rise. And for this, we are seeing more interest in quick build, kind of rapid implementation or demonstration style projects. And this is like coming up as a way to fill the gap between the planning work that we are doing and just the realization and like reality that the long-term infrastructure projects are going to be slow and expensive, and people looking for a way to keep the momentum going between kind of this planning process and an eventual project. And like, what could we do like cheaply or quickly to implement some of the projects that we're coming up with as a part of this process. And I also think there's more awareness of this type of thing right now after seeing like some of the COVID street closures and ways that communities adapted to create space for people to walk and bike or sit out on the sidewalk, taking parking places. And that, I feel like those types of things were in the news so much, and just in like maybe in that community or in the neighboring community, and just top of mind as something that isn't out of reach to actually implement. And just a
there was one more question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, maybe they're connecting on it, but Janice asked in the chat, how are the park and walks going now that we're deep into the school year? And then Grace answered back a little bit of information. Supporting the Banks community comes to mind. Really hard. So I think that question, the general question is after people have implemented some of these things like park and walk specifically, do we know if they continue to carry it out through the school year? And do we have a mechanism for checking back up with them on some of these things? And I feel like that's a good question for me too, because I don't know, we do this like one planning process, but then we don't really have like continued follow up with communities. So, but I'll pause, Katie, to see if you have any additional things to say before I just sort of take this as a suggestion for the future of like how we should ideally follow up with communities.
We definitely have communities follow up with us and like ask follow-up questions, and I've like joined meetings, especially from some of our first round of Safe Routes to School plans that we put together, that are always like the absolute best, where they're like trying to implement something and have like a follow-up question about like, should we put the rapid flashing beacon on this corner or like this corner? And just some of those like kind of nitty-gritty follow-up questions, which are always fun. But on the like education, kind of like, are those things continuing? I think the hubs are the way that we like continue to like keep the pulse, or like if communities like want to like have a more consistent connection with the state level programming, coming to those meetings every month is like a good way to do that, and for us to kind of keep tabs on what's happening. Yeah, it's a good question though.
Great question, Janice. In progress. Sounds like we're trying to still figure out the best way to keep connected with communities, but it's not something we do if they're not reaching out currently.
Yeah, then on the quick build front, one example that I'll give is this, with the photo here is of a school street in Hood River, which they piloted during Walk and Roll to School Day in October, and used that as a way to create space for students walking and biking to have more space right around the school entrance. That was often a place that was very congested, and it was received like very successfully. And I know they're like looking for ways to either make this permanent or seasonally permanent, or ways for this to continue. And then the other kind of big request that I don't think we've been able to build any of these yet, but a lot of interest in kind of pedestrian lanes or interim solutions for badly needed sidewalk infill, and especially along like rural kind of county highway style roads, or areas where it's like going to take a really long time to build a complete sidewalk, but can we look for kind of shorter term solutions for getting something in place where students are already walking and biking along the side of the road. The fourth theme that I'll talk about is equity, flexibility, and right sizing the approach for each community. And this really gets to the importance of scaling the process to the community and their capacity, meaning like availability of data, time, agency staffing levels and capacity, and the degree to which the school community wants to be involved. And to illustrate this, I'll kind of compare the process for two communities, Hood River and Hefner. And so Hood River was, and these are kind of like two ends of the spectrum. So in Hood River, the community was extremely ready to dive into this process, a really engaged group of agency partners and community champions, a new bike fleet, kind of thriving bike culture, primed to take on some bigger infrastructure improvements, interest in getting an education program going. I think that I met with the project management team like 8 to 10 times over the course of the year. Like this was no small lift from the community groups and agencies that were participating. And each one of those meetings had like 10 plus very active participants. On the other hand, Hefner, like many communities we've worked with, is very small and has very limited staff capacity to be involved in something like this, but also is really interested in improving safety and comfort for students walking and biking to school, but just doesn't have the same like ability to spend all of that time working with us. And so like we were able to kind of adapt our process to meet their needs, and we held fewer meetings, we reduced and kind of streamlined our review process, and just tried to like still get them really good information, but like not ask them to spend as much time working with us. And we did get some like good feedback from both of those communities, like just hearing that they were happy with the process and like happy with the results, and like those processes like actually looked really different. And then the other aspect that I'll mention, kind of importance of equity, flexibility, and right sizing our approach, is around equitable engagement. And I really believe that flexibility is at the heart of being able to conduct equitable community engagement. And so, for example, in Hood River, we kind of did our typical process of online engagement through the school, walk audits that were like parents were invited, and had really limited responses from the large Latinx community at each of the schools we were working with. And after like kind of talking about this with our project management team, we were able to just push our timeline by like months. We were like, okay, like we got to slow this down, go back to the drawing board, and make sure that these parents are able to participate with us. So that meant doing additional relationship building with the school district, and partnering even more closely with a couple of community groups, and just making sure that we had given parents the opportunity to participate and were able to connect and hear their transportation needs. And then the photo on the screen here is from the Jervis Dia de los Muertos, and that's another a community festival where we were able to table and get input from family members. And that's another part of the flexibility of the program, is to be able to time what we're doing when there's community events that we're able to attend. And yeah, I think this kind of sounds simple, but is often sort of tricky to get these like big planning processes to align with community needs and timelines, instead of getting really consumed by like the deadline, and like we said that we would be done by this time and like it's not done. And as like project managers, I feel like that can be really hard to kind of let go of those things a little bit.
I think it also has to be really important if you are a bureaucrat who works with partners and consultants, and to be also remember to be really flexible, and to realize that the goal is to work with the community and not to meet this specific timeline, so that together we can create the flexibility that communities need.
Yes, absolutely. My fifth theme here, back to our Safe Routes to School cult, is the unifying power of Safe Routes to School. And I come back to this again and again. Safe Routes to School is one of those like magical things that really matters everywhere, in rural communities and urban communities, like across the political spectrum. People care about the safety and health of their students. And just personally, I'm from West Virginia, originally from a pretty small town. And when I go home, I always use Safe Routes to School as an example of the work that I do. And it's really cool to see people kind of like find that interesting and passionate, that like if I kind of started in a different place with the work that I do, they would not have the same reaction. And yeah, and we saw this at attending some very contentious both city council and school board meetings this year, and being amongst discussions of mask mandates and just all these things that are dividing communities around the state, and then having like our plan be on the agenda, and have like people that were just arguing for the preceding 20 minutes be like, oh, like that sounds really great, and just kind of agree that it's important that students be able to safely get around their neighborhoods. And another aspect of this is being the bridge between like different levels of government, and particularly between ODOT and local communities. And just having a space with an outside facilitator to convene and share information and get everybody on the same page. We had some interesting examples of this around ODOT's ADA ramp installation work that's happening, and some of the like really small communities, particularly I was working in Eastern Oregon, and like that's a huge opportunity to have ODOT like do a couple of extra things, or like think through the needs of the school when they're already coming in to do a bunch of work down that community's main street. And we had a couple of like very satisfying opportunities where like that was about to happen the next year, and we were able to like tweak what they were going to do a little bit and get some like big wins for the community at like little expense, or like very little expense to ODOT. And the last theme that I'll talk about is connections to other travel modes. And the first one, safe routes to transit. This is something that we've been really trying to elevate more and more as we've been doing rounds of these plans. And we think of this as both like school bus access and promotion, as well as public transit, kind of like where feasible. And two examples of this, the image on the left, the Google Maps image on the left side of the screen is from Nestucca Valley. And for their Safe Routes to School plan process, the thing that they were the most interested in working on was they had safety concerns basically along their rural school bus route. So the school is in Cloverdale, circled on this map, and then the line is the bus route. And so they're bringing kids in from pretty far away, and had concerns for how students were getting to their bus stop, and wanted to work with us to think through what some of the options would be to make that safer. And so the typical kind of safe routes parameters like didn't really apply here, but it was really cool to kind of pivot and work with them to think this through and provide recommendations for students getting to the bus stop. And then the other example that I share is again from Hood River, where Columbia Area Transit was a very active member of our project management team, and just a consistent, important partner looking for ways to align their service with the mobility needs of students, and like trying to think through kind of like where the bus stop was, how that connects to the school, and where students were needing to get to, particularly after school, was one of the big ways that middle school students were using the transit service. And then another big theme and kind of constant challenge that comes up are the interactions with freight. And a lot of the schools are located on county and ODOT roads, which are important safe routes connections, but also very important freight routes. And you can see the image here on the right, a crossing guard stopping a big logging truck in front of a school. And this comes up in communities really frequently, and is just another like factor to design as we're making recommendations like this is happening, and like our facilities need to be safe and allow freight access. And finally, I'll close with just another important piece of this, which is connections to other places that students need to be able to get to before and after school. Safe routes to snacks, as we call it. And the ubiquitous Dollar General in many communities, or like other kind of like small restaurants, or grocery stores, different places that students are trying to get to. We always try to identify those and think through kind of how our recommendations are facilitating those connections as well. And with that, happy to answer more questions. This slide has a couple of like our favorite images from our field work. These two are from the Dalles, just a equestrian going by the school, and then some other just like great signs. Work. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
So we haven't had any questions in the chat, but a couple of like, thanks for the information, inspirational things, giving people a lot of ideas for what they can do in their communities. So any other questions are totally welcome, as well as maybe Katie, if we stop sharing the slides, we can see everyone's face.
Good idea.
And I would also, I think we only actually have, I guess, about 8 minutes left, but if anybody is interested in telling us what's happening in your community that you thought of, that's something that we didn't learn in all of our travels this past couple of years, we'd love to hear about those. And just feel free to unmute and start talking, or raise your hand and I can help facilitate that. I will say this is one of my favorite programs that we do, and in another life, I wish I was Katie and able to like actually get out from behind my desk and signing invoices and go to communities and be able to work with them. So
Leanne, we're gonna get you out on.
I am going somewhere next, for sure. But this is a really great program, really near and dear to my heart. Two things I wanted to mention was that it's consistently undersubscribed, or right at, it's consistently the amount of people apply are the amount of people that we can serve. So if you're interested in this at all, please consider applying in 2024. You will likely get this service. I was going to say one more thing and it totally slipped my mind. So I'll stop there and maybe I'll remember it. Janice's camera is on. She might have something to say. I also saw somebody unmute for a second. Yeah, go for it, Janice.
Well, Megan Moser, she unmuted, so I want to see if she wants to go first.
Yeah, Megan.
I was just curious. I just had a question on like, what are the challenges working with rural areas versus working with urban areas? Like, I'm curious how it differs and what your strategies are and how they differ when you're in a rural area where there's not as much walkability and such.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the like connections with other travel modes slides like get that, some of that. The like pivoting to like if it's not really feasible to walk and bike due to distance or due to infrastructure right around the school, how can safe routes to school like continue to be useful, or like what does that mean? And I think part of what that means is expanding like the geographic reach and looking at safe routes to bus stops, and then also looking at like what can you do on campus to have like bike and pedestrian education, or increase like try to get some of those same like benefits from students like walking and biking just on the school campus. And I think a lot of it is also about capacity, where like what can we do that's useful that also aligns with like the capacity to both work with us and to implement something when we're done working together. Like I think like the comparison between like Hefner and Hood River, where like what we like the way that we worked with each of those communities was pretty different. But like if we had spent the amount of like resources and time with Hefner, like that would have been totally overwhelming, and like I think actually like slowed their momentum for safe routes to school, than kind of like giving them like some ideas and kind of like a more manageable like entry into this realm.
There's two more things that I would add. And one was that the expanding sort of the reach of the plan to help address rural communities was a really intentional move. A lot of those projects actually wouldn't be eligible for the Safe Routes to School construction program based on the funding restrictions that we have. However, we decided that as long as there's at least 1 or 2 projects in that plan that would be eligible, we can help the community and meet them where they're at. And if they need to look at safe routes to bus stops, we want to help them do that. And their project list might not be eligible for ODOT funds, but at least 1 or 2 projects would be, and then the rest could just be whatever they need. And once you have it in a plan, or once the people all came together, we oftentimes found like the school district or the maintenance folks at the city were able to say like, oh, we could do that. We could put up that sign, or we could do that. So it's not all that ODOT, like that people would need to apply for funds in order to do the things. Sometimes just bringing the right people to the table helps things happen. The second thing I would mention is this was one challenge that we had in a rural community where just like I think that community members might be slightly less familiar with the planning process. So we had a couple of instances where after the plan was created, families were like, I don't understand why this isn't done by now. Like we did that whole process, we did that plan. I don't understand what's happening, and having to like go back and be a little bit more clear, like this is a planning process. This is how transportation planning works, which is like it takes a year to plan at least, and then it takes another 5 to 10 years to find the funding, build the projects, and they might not actually ever be built, but getting them in a plan is what sets it all in motion. So that was sort of a difference, as well as like remembering it's like, oh yeah, like 10 years ago, I didn't know what transportation planning was like either. And so it's good to explain a lot of that.
Great, thank you.
Leanne, I would even say that that's true, not just in rural areas, like
Mm-hmm.
just don't understand how long a process can take.
Right.
And even if we do make a plan, there may never be funding for those projects. I just wanted to say thank you, Katie and Leanne. Like that was so great to hear what's happening around the state, and like some of the issues that rural communities are experiencing. Like we experience also within the Portland metro area, like the freight, and traveling to bus stops. But I'm really curious, and it's not a question, it's more of like, can you keep us updated? Like when you're thinking about the alternative, like pedestrian walkways, we have so many streets in Portland that don't have sidewalks, but we have kids walking them. And so we're trying to figure out like, how can we do some quick or temporary walkways? So I would love to hear more as you like figure that out or try things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we will likely have more to share about that in like the coming year.
I think we have 1 more minute. Maddie, you had your camera off for a second. Oh, you have to run. Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Maddie, Lindsay, will our contact information be like available if folks want to follow up?
I think it should be. The little lobby page should have at least some of your presenter info there that folks can go look at.
Yeah, I just popped my email in the chat too.
Perfect.
Oh.
And they can always reach out to us at the Street Trust, and we can put them in touch with y'all as well.